receive the promise that he waited 100 years for. We saw that God asked him to sacrifice his only son, who was not a little tad by any means. He was nearing his 20s, if not beyond that. And God rescued him. And what we looked at last week is how you see Jesus sprinkled all over that chapter, that what God asked of Abraham and how he stayed his hand was mirrored in Jesus, except there was no one to stay the hand of God when Jesus was on the cross. We looked at, there were so many parallels in that story to that of Jesus. Today we go with Abraham into a tough part, and that is the loss of his beloved spouse. They've been married 90 plus years, I'm guessing, by this time. That's a long-term relationship. And as we do so, to remember that marriage is an honorable estate. It is God's idea. That's why I like the phrase holy matrimony, because as we looked in Genesis chapter 1, the institution of marriage was given by God to humanity before the fall into sin. So it's God's idea. That's why it's a holy relationship. And God uses the marriage relationship to paint a picture of what Christ and his bride, the church, is to be. So there's so many parallels in that. And so this long-term marriage between Abraham and Sarah, and like all of our relationships, it was not all roses. There were some thorns. We've seen several examples in their marriage relationship where they either trying to push God or go around God. They were trying to set up their own timetable. We saw Abraham lie about his relationship to Sarah. We saw Sarah follow through with that lie, and it got him in trouble. But above and beyond that, because God was the center of their relationship, I believe it was a very blessed relationship despite all the human things. There's no such thing as a perfect marriage. It just doesn't exist. I also know that marriage takes a lot of work. Okay? But you and I had this conversation not long back with your sweetheart.
Yes.
It's like a garden, isn't it? I got to do their wedding. That's coming up on a year pretty quick, isn't it?
September.
September, yeah, I remember it's hotter than places.
Yeah. After the week before being so lovely.
Yeah, with them, I use the example, marriage is like a garden. You're gonna have weeds in it. It's deal with them before they become big, lest you, as you pull out that root, you take some of the good stuff with it. So it does take work. So let's jump into the text here. When Sarah was 127 years old, so how old was she when Isaac was born? About 81. Yeah, she was 80 when the announcement came. So she's about 81, maybe 85, somewhere in there. So she's 127 years old when she died at Kiriath Arba, now called Hebron, in the land of Canaan. That's important to know where they are, the land of Canaan, because as we move through Genesis, that's going to really play, and into Exodus, that's the land that God's going to give them, but it's not theirs yet. Where Abraham mourned and wept for her. Then leaving her body, he said to the Hittite elders, "Here I am, a stranger and a foreigner among you. Please sell me a piece of land so that I can give my wife a proper burial." The Hittites replied to Abraham, "Listen, my lord," that's a title of respect. "You are an honored prince among us." Remember the king, when he gave him the piece of land and said, "That's all yours, go up there." So he was appointed at that time a prince, so they're acknowledging that. "You are honored prince among us. Choose the finest of our tombs and bury her there. No one will refuse to help you in this way." He offers to buy it, they offer to give it to him. As we play through this story, Abraham will not take it as a gift because it will not be his. But if he ransoms or pays for the land, then it will be his. And as we move through the story, they're willing to give him a cave, but he wants more than that. There's a reason for that we'll discover as we go through. Okay. Then Abram bowed low to the Hittites and said, "Since you are willing to help me in this way, be so kind as to ask Ephron, son of Zohar, to let me buy his cave at Machpelah, down at the end of his field. I will pay the full price in the presence of witnesses so that I will have have a permanent burial place for my family. He's looking beyond just Sarah, but this would be a family place for them. Okay? Ephron was sitting there among the others. He asked Abraham as the others listened, or he answered Abraham as the other listened, speaking publicly before all the Hittite elders of the town. "No, my lord," he said to Abraham, "please listen to me. I will give you the field and the cave. Here in the presence of my people, I give it to you. Go and bury your dead." If he accepts this offer, it will be a gift, and he's not willing to do that because very soon this is going to be the possession of all of Israel, but he's not willing to accept it as a gift. He wants to own it. He doesn't want to be in debt to them, favor for favor. Abraham again bowed low before the citizens of the land. He replied to Ephron as everyone listened. Notice how we keep finding out this was a very public thing. It wasn't a deal between two businessmen, but it was done where there were more than 2 or 3 witnesses. He replied to Ephron as everyone listened, "No, listen to me. I will buy it from you. Let me pay the full price for the field so I can bury my dead there." Ephron answered Abraham, "My lord, please listen to me. The land is worth 400 pieces of silver, but what is that between friends? Go ahead and bury your dead." So what's playing in here is this 400 pieces of silver is way more than the land is worth. So he's kind of taking advantage of him in that. But then he kind of like lessens it by saying, "But what's 400 pieces of silver between friends?" Well, you get money in the middle of people and it can be a very big deal, right? Be a very big deal. Again, he's overvaluing what the land worth, according to the commentaries I read, by about 100%. So Abraham agreed to Ephron's price and paid the amount he had suggested, 400 pieces of silver, weighted according to the market standard. In other words, the scales of that town. The Hittite elders witnessed this transaction. So Abraham bought the plot of land belonging to Ephron at Machpelah near Mamre. This included the field itself, the cave that was in it, and all the surrounding trees. It transferred to Abraham as his permanent possession in the presence of the Hittite elders of the city gate. Remember, Abraham is looking for a place that his descendants could also join him in this burial plot. So it would need to be bigger than just a cave. Then Abraham buried his wife Sarah there in Canaan, in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, also called Hebron. So the field and the cave were transferred from the Hittites to Abraham for use as a permanent burial place. It becomes part of the possession of the people of God there. Any comments or questions here? Early this morning when I got to work, I was just jumping around on Google, and a discussion about Christian understanding of cremation was one of the topics that I saw out there. So I just poked around just to investigate it a little bit. In the history of the Christian church, if you go back a couple centuries, there was a time when Christian churches were dead set against cremation. And the reason being is that non-believers would cremate their bodies in mockery of God, throw it to the wind and said, "Let's see if he can pick this up." And so it was a reaction to that practice that for a long time the Christian church was against cremation. As time has gone by, I don't know any church body that is against cremation. We bury because that's the custom, not just in the U.S., but it's the custom worldwide. Every country I've ever visited, there are cemeteries for that. But it's becoming more commonplace. When I buried Mr. Landvetter, he obviously was buried at Fort Sam Houston in there, and dignified in every way. If you've ever been there, it is amazing the respect that are paid to our dead warriors. But he was cremated and put in this large crematorium, what do they call it?
Columbarium.
Columbarium, thank you. I couldn't spell it, but I know that's the word. And they were row after row after row. I probably could not find it today, there were so many. But if I get to the right spot, he's in the far upper left next to a wall going this way. So he's on that outside wall, I can find it. But that's becoming much more commonplace. Largely due to the fact that with 327 or 330 million people in the US alone right now, we're gonna run out of space. Churches will run into that issue if they're very long-term and prospering. Like the church we served in Georgetown had to expand their cemetery because of that. But there's many reasons why people choose to do that. I'm aware of family members they purchase one plot and all the urns are put in that one plot, or churches like Faith Lutheran has a columbarium in that wall of their church.
San Geronimo now has,
Is that what they're putting here?
that's what they
In the
put
middle?
in.
They ran out of space too.
Well, they have columbarium. And they have enough pads, it looks like they're going to put, they can expand it.
Faith is actually built into one of the walls. If you're standing at the altar, it's over here in a wall. And that always concerned me because that building's not gonna last forever. What's gonna happen to those? That's,
First Methodist has one in their chapel
they do.
also.
And Emmanuel's has
Emmanuel's
one.
Emmanuel's has one?
Mhm.
Okay, I've never seen that one, okay. But it was an interesting little aside to my morning. That's what I do in the morning before JC gets there at work. Something was-
He's really quiet. I don't think he's in there unless I see his truck.
I'm always trying to learn something every day, and so if something pops up or I hear something on the radio on my way to work, might as well take a few minutes to investigate it.
No, one link leads to the next link, to the next link, and
Yeah, that's why
where'd one go?
when I get on Facebook videos, hours can go by. I don't know if any of you do that or not, but I'll get lost in the golfing videos.
Oh, I was talking about my apps in the Bible apps.
Yeah. So what's not spoken of here is how much it must have grieved Abraham after all those years. Married to, as we were told repeatedly, a very beautiful woman. I bring that up because when Isaac goes for a wife, the exact thing that was said about Sarah is said about Rebecca, that they were extremely attractive. It doesn't say much about his grief there, but you know that he did. He didn't, unless he was German. German people have, I have to tell the story. Linda Movitz, her husband Elder, remember that? They were such a riot together. They were like sister brother, but always joking. Elder one time had a fly on the antenna of his car and wanted to know how fast on a gravel road could he go before the fly fell off, and it was 80 miles an hour. If you've ever been on a gravel road, you lose a little traction. But Elder was driving a grain truck into Central City one day, and it was a major highway, and he was on a farm road and had a heart attack. And I remember Mrs. Movitz called me up, and I went to her farm, picked her up and drove her, and she sniffled and maybe a tear fell when we were in identifying his remains before the coroner took him, and never again. I don't know how you do that. I've got German blood in me, but that was that old, hard-headed German way.
Grieved in her own way.
She did, but she would not, I mean, you just don't show any emotion, especially old German Nebraska farmers. It just stunned me. I'd never seen that before. Most people, you want to really see people grieve, go to an African-American funeral. Oh my goodness, they get it out.
They boo
Wow.
big time.
Yeah, and that's my heart language. You know, is I want to be around people like that. I'm not much of a crier, but if something ever happens to her, I'm going to go over to Black Baptist Church and have him do the service, because I want to feel that. There's just something about that. Anyway, it doesn't mention anything about Abraham's grief, but you know, after that many years.
Well,
But in a
they
way,
said that he wanted her
In
in the
verse
right.
3, I don't know your translation, this is the NIV, but it says, then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife.
Verse 3.
Verse 3. So that means that he had been sitting there beside his wife.
And so
Said
the
in
fact
verse
that
two.
Yeah.
he said Abraham wanted
And he
and
couldn't
mourned
remember.
her.
And weep for her.
Adamant about wanting to cave in the land, so like you said, it's his, not one
Yeah.
else can mess with it.
For
I
his-
can go there
He can
anytime I
go
want.
anytime he
That's
wants.
that. The end of verse 2 says he mourned
Because
and weep.
if he would have just accepted the gift, anybody could have been there and gone and done what they wanted, right?
Yeah, so you're right, in verse 2, it does say he mourned and wept for her. That's not saying much. In my experience, people grieving, it takes time. It can be months, it can be years. And everybody grieves differently, there's no one set way. None of the people do that. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the author of The 7 Stages of Grief. Denial, I don't know if I can remember them all. Denial, anger, bargaining.
I didn't have time for any of that.
She was the first that I know of that explored these stages of grief, and she watched it because of the work that she did, and came up with 7 stages. But she'll note, if you ever read her book, which is not the most exciting thing you'll ever read, but she'll talk in there about how people can skip a step, never having gone there. Some people get stuck in one for a long, long time. I think pastors ought to read that so they can help figure out where somebody is, to know what stage they're in, to help minister to them if they're stuck. That's the reason that we were asked to read it, and I think it's good for that. But yeah, so you're right. There is that one little thing, but yeah. Okay, let's go on to chapter 24. Let's find Isaac a wife. Abraham was now a very old man. I believe he's plus 130, 140 in this stage. The Lord had blessed him in every way, physically, spiritually, mentally. He had blessed him in every way. One day Abraham said to his oldest servant, the man in charge of his household, take an oath by putting your hand under my thigh. Swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not allow my son to marry one of these local Canaanite women. Go instead to my homeland, to my relatives, and find a wife there for my son Isaac. I looked and looked and looked in my commentaries and resources to find why did he have to put his hand on his thigh. And none of the commentaries would touch that. I didn't mean that double entendre, but why?
Well, did you read the one in your mom's Bible?
Mm-mm. What does
Put
it
your
say?
hand under my thigh near the organ of procreation, probably because this oath was related to the continuance of Abraham's line through Isaac.
That's what I was about to guesstimate, because I think that is the root of the
Significance.
That is the significance. I'm glad we're adults in here. But I think that's it. Thank you, Miss Linda, for sharing that. But I think that's the only thing I could come up with, is that it had something to do with the promise of the millions and countless numbers of people. I would not ask my servant to do that today. I know. Okay. Now notice his concern is that he not marry one of the Canaanite people. Why would that be an issue?
Because of their gods.
Different gods. The mixing of a false god to the real God. And what we'll find as we move through the history of the Old Testament, a lot of the Israelites, although God commanded the same of them, they started looking, saying, man, those Canaanite women are kind of cute. Let's go marry them. Well, then you get this mismatch of that, and usually the Israelite would go the way of the other one, and in many cases, they just didn't have a relationship with anybody.
What happened to Solomon?
Mm-hmm. So I've often recommended to young couples when they get married, if one comes, let's say, from a Lutheran background and another from like a Catholic background, they'll often pull to a third one. like maybe go Methodist or Episcopal, and I always advised against it because neither one of you has any roots there. Find one, typically and ideally the one that's preaching the Word of God, and that's where you should center yourself. But if you go to a place that neither one of you have any roots, it's going to be very difficult to do that. But that's his concern, is that he marries somebody who's going to have the same faith walk as Isaac was raised in. The servant asked, but what if I can't find a young woman who's willing to travel so far from home? Should I take Isaac there to live among your relatives in the land you came from? In other words, can we let Isaac pick out his wife? Don't make me do that. And it's a good question, because we're going to find out that Abraham absolutely forbids the servant from taking Isaac there. This has to be God leading it, or it's not going to happen. I forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, we'll cover it when we get there. But what if I can't find it? Find someone, okay? No, Abraham responded, be careful never to take my son there. For the Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and my native land, solemnly promised to give this land to my descendants. He will send his angel ahead of you, and he will see to it that you find a wife there for my son. If she is unwilling to come back to you, then you are free from this oath of mine, but under no circumstances are you to take my son there. He wanted Isaac to stay in the land that they were going to possess. If he left, that could call into question the ownership of what they had, especially since he's a very old man. If Isaac's away when it dies, the Hittites may just take it all back. Okay. So the servant took an oath by putting his hand under the thigh of his master, Abraham. He swore to follow Abraham's instructions. Then he loaded 10 of Abraham's camels with all kinds of expensive gifts from his master. He traveled to a distant Aram, and Naharaim. He went to the town where Abraham's brother Nahor had settled. He made the camels kneel beside a well just outside the town. It was evening, and the women were coming out to draw water. Lord God, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, he prayed, give me success today and show unfailing love to my master Abraham. See, I am standing here beside this spring, and the young women of the town are coming down to draw water. This is my request. I will ask one of them, please give me a drink from your jug. If she says, yes, have a drink, and I will water your camels too, let her be the one you have selected as Isaac's wife. This is how I will know that you have shown unfailing love to my master. He's not putting out a test to see if God can pass the test as much as he's simply laying his request before the Lord very specifically, isn't he? So that there's no doubt, God, that you're the one leading this. I think that's pretty cool. It says something about prayer, though, doesn't it, too? That you can be very specific in your requests to the Lord. I have a feeling that many times in our prayer life, we're too bashful to give utterance to what's really going on in the back of our head, because we want to either sound holy before the Lord, or we think, well, maybe he's not going to do it. But you know, the Lord knows your thoughts. So why would you not put them into your prayers? Now, in this particular case, God's going to exactly answer the servant's prayer as he asks it. But that's not what God always does. God can say no. God can also say, you're not ready for it yet. That's my version of not now. But it's interesting, in his prayer to the Lord, he's very specific, because he wants there to be no doubt that whoever this girl is, God's the one that picked her. That's the point. Where did he learn that kind of spirituality?
Probably from Abraham.
Most likely from Abraham. He'd been with him for a long, long time and saw his master in his prayer life, in his walk with the Lord, and it influenced him. John Maxwell, I remember hearing him give a talk one time. John Maxwell said that even the most introverted person will have the chance to influence 10,000 people in their lifetime. There's not very many introverts in this room. Sorta. But I just see Abraham's influence carried over. Next verse. When he had finished praying, he saw a young woman named Rebekah coming out with a water jug on her shoulders. She was the daughter of Bethuel, who was the son of Abraham's brother Nahor. So this would be Nahor's granddaughter. Rebekah was very beautiful and old enough to be married, but she was still a virgin. That means that she's probably 12 to 13 or older. She's also called a young woman, so she's probably not yet in her 20s, but she's right there in the sweet spot of the Old Testament for folks to get married. She went down to, let me see if I missed something here. Very beautiful, must be very, but she was still a virgin. She went down to the spring, filled her jug, and came up again. Running over to her, the servant said, "Please give me a little drink of water from your jug." You see his anxiousness? He runs to her. "Yes, my lord," she answered. "Have a drink." And she quickly lowered her jug from her shoulder and gave him a drink. When she had given him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink." So she quickly emptied her jug into the watering trough and ran back to the well to draw water for all his camels. How many camels? 10. In my little research, a camel can hold between 20 and 30 gallons of water. This well was not one of those pump-up ones you used to see at Grandpa's farm, but it was dug down where you had to walk down to it. John Maxwell calls this the Rebekah principle. How many trips did she take if this was a 5-gallon jug to fill or to completely water 10 camels? A lot of trips. What's the math on that? I'm not good at math.
200 divided by 5.
20 trips? No,
40.
40 trips.
Because you've got 10 camels at 20 gallons each, that's
Just say
200.
50, if you want it, 300 gallons. Average it up.
40 to 50, that's a lot of trips. Carrying 5 gallons of water. Go home and get a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up, and walk around your neighborhood. 50
times 45 pounds.
45 pounds.
We're not used to that, but that's what you see in Uganda.
And where is she carrying the water? On her shoulder. She's like an MMA girl. I just want you to see that this was no little thing that she did. This was huge. Jesus, his advice to us is if someone asks you to for your coat or for your shirt, give them your coat also, go that extra mile. And here she's demonstrating faithfulness. She didn't have to do this. Giving him a drink would have been more than enough. But it also says something about her character, doesn't it? This is a guest, and I'm going to take care of him and his camel. He must have seen that the camels were thirsty or whatever, but this was huge, what she did. It's a huge undertaking. The servant watched her in silence, wondering whether or not the Lord had given him success in his mission. That kind of puzzles me because she just did everything she prayed to God would happen, and he's watching just to see. Then at last, when the camels had finished drinking, he took out a gold ring for her nose and 2 large gold bracelets for her wrists. Very expensive gifts if you think about that. This is the first mention in the scriptures of a ring in the nose, which by the way has become popular among young girls today. Our daughter has one.
Hers too.
What does it mean? Now don't ever let this out of the room, but it looks to me like a bull ring and you lead them around with, but that